Hello and welcome back to the Sanibel Online Writers Conference this afternoon. I hope you guys, if you've been with us today, are enjoying the conversations as much as I have. In our next session, we're going to be talking about poetry a little bit. But before I introduce our presenters, I just want to again share one of the links to places where you guys can help support the Sanibel community after Hurricane Ian came through and really just devastated the island. The team from A Mighty Blaze will put the link in the comments here for you. The resource is Community Housing and Resources is what it's called. It's a nonprofit organization with a mission to provide affordable housing for families and individuals who serve the Sanibel community. So these are the people that take care of us when we're out there on the island. So if you have any time, if you have any extra money, or just feel, in your heart like you want to support this community that's been so helpful and welcoming for us when we are on the island, just take a minute after we're done here to, click through that link and see if you can help out with the, some of our workers in the hospitality industry, especially been hit really hard out there on Sanibel. So I'm going to introduce all of our presenters here. One of them is having technical difficulties, so hopefully she'll be able to join us soon. So in addition to being an accomplished poet, Mahogany L. Browne is the executive director of Just Media, a media literacy initiative designed to support the groundwork of criminal justice leaders and community members. Her latest project is a poetry collection responding to the impact of mass incarceration on women and children. The collection is titled, I Remember Death by Its Proximity to What I Love. And Denise Duhamel published her 14th book of poetry last year. It's titled Second Story. The Southern Review of Books wrote about Second Story. While this collection is certainly of its time with its references to gun violence, Hurricane Irma, COVID, and Trump, Duhamel's greatest accomplishment lies in her artfulness. And there's Mahogany. I just introduced you. Duhamel's greatest accomplishment lies in her artfulness, which promises that these poems will endure long after the events depicted in them have faded from the headlines. Major Jackson has published 5 books of poetry. His most recent is The Absurd Man. About that collection, Publishers Weekly wrote, Jackson's eye is laser sharp and wry. Throughout the book, his weaving of mythology and literary references serve as context for confrontations with personal ghosts. And in 2020, Didi Jackson published Moonjar, which author Ann Hood called one of the loveliest and most honest books about grief and the long road back to hope and love that I've read in a very long time. So all of these wonderful people you're about to hear from are accomplished poets. They've earned numerous awards and fellowships. They've appeared in countless publications and anthologies. They clearly know what they're doing. So without further ado, I'm going to step aside and let's let Mahogany, Denise, Didi, and Major take us into poetry. And beyond. So take it away. Thanks, guys.
Great. Thank you, Jason. So I'll go ahead and start. And I wanted to talk about form, traditional form, people mixing up form, people making their own forms. And I wanted to start off with a quote by Adrienne Rich, who once remarked that traditional forms in her early poetry functioned as asbestos gloves, gloves that could pick up really difficult material, gloves that she couldn't approach with her bare hands, so that the form gave something to her, and I think to a lot of poets when writing about difficult subject matter. And I was thinking about now how so many contemporary poets bend form, break form, put form back together to make the traditional or the received form very much their own and very much of this time. So I wanted to start with Tim Siebel's, and he has a great book. I'm just going to hold it up because that's what you're supposed to do these days. It's called Voodoo Libretto. I know, it's so good. And it's his Selected and New, Super Fat. It's really good. And
PHAT too.
Pardon me?
Super fat. PHAT.
Yeah, fat with an F and a P. Really good. It's just really a terrific collection. I love watching his early work, which is a lot of free verse, kind of morph into these received forms that he bends and breaks and puts together. And I think especially for those people who are listening, who are poets, younger poets, newer poets who are thinking like, I want to write about this, but it's too hard. It's like, it becomes cliche, it becomes melodramatic. In my hands, maybe a form can help. It can help you get to really interesting places. So what Tim does throughout, maybe around halfway point in this book, he starts writing what he calls the blues villanelle, which is a form that he made up. It's fabulous. And for those of you, I'll just quickly say, people probably can just do a quick Google search and you can learn, if you want to write a villanelle, you can write a villanelle. If you want to write the blues, you can. But the blues especially is a uniquely American form. And these are generally 3-line stanzas, right? So with the rhymes are A, 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 B, 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 C, Z, C, all the way down. And sometimes the second line repeats the first. So, and then that third line will bring home the rhyme in a different way. So of course, the blues are usually a theme that comes from lament, suffering, struggle, real life experiences. And blues poems, importantly to say, can be of any length. You got to do the 3 lines, but beyond that, they can be of any length. So the villanelle is also uses the 3-line stanzas, right? So 5 stanzas of 3 lines each. They rely on 2 rhymes through the whole poem. So my students love to write villanelles because you really only have to write half as many lines, really, and you just kind of repeat them in this weird and wonderful pattern. So you've got the 5 3-line stanzas, and then a final quatrain with the first and third lines of the stanza repeating for a total of 19 lines. Again, you can look, if you want to do one, there's all kinds of cheat sheets online that you can find. And maybe the most famous one is do not go gentle into the good night, rage, rage against the dying light. Or there's, there's many, but that one comes to mind. So Tim Siebel's, what he's done is take the villanelle form. So is it villanelle? Is it blues? It's both. But if you look on the page, it'll look more like a villanelle because of that extra 4-line stanza at the end. However, he busts it open so that it's 25 lines instead of the 19. So he has, I believe that maybe, I'm going to look in the comments, but I think this is up somewhere. Anyway, if you just do a quick Google search, if you don't see it, it is called All the Times Blues Villanelle, if you want to follow along, but I'm just going to go ahead and read it. Tim writes, I wrote this poem in the year after my parents died. I'd struggled to speak about this loss, but eventually something my father said came to me and the writing began. I've always loved the blues, the raw feelings captured in melody, the language play concerning varieties of damage to the heart. And the villanelle, with its agile repetitions, seems to echo the blues. Both forms evolved from work songs. I love the way rhythm and rhyme tacitly nudge us towards singing, and the song carries away some of the ache of sorrow. Oh, okay, yes, so you can see it on your screen. I can see it on my screen if you want to follow along. This is called All the Time Blues Villanelle. Hard to watch somebody lose their mind. Maybe everybody should just go get stoned. My father said it happens all the time. I knew a woman lost her soul to wine, but who doesn't live with their life on loan? Shame to watch somebody lose their mind. Don't you gotta wonder when people say they're fine? Given what we're given, I guess they act and groan. I think I used to say that all the time. When my parents died, I coined a little shrine and thought about all the stuff they used to own. Felt like I was gonna lose my mind. Used to have a friend who smiled all the time. Then he started saying he could hear the devil moan. Hate to see a brother lose his goddamn mind. Doesn't matter how you pull, the hours break the line. Mirror, mirror on the wall, how come nobody's home? Broke my soul for real when my mother lost her mind. Tried to keep my head right, but sanity's a climb. Been working on the straight face, I guess my cover's blown. My father tried to tell me all the time. Had one less question, baby, but maybe never mind. After a while, even springtime starts to drone. Hard to see somebody lose their mind. My pop says, boy, it happens all the time. So I throw that up there as the first poem we're presenting. I don't know who wants to go next, but anyone, I guess, can just jump in.
I'll jump in. I love that so much. And
Thanks, Mahogany.
Tim, I had to go get my book to read along. So that's
Oh,
why
good.
I was like, oh, I can do this. In class, I am into it. I would like to bring into the room Wanda Coleman. Heart First Into the Ruin is the complete set of her American Sonnets, which is a form that she created, a form that inspired Terrence Hayes for his phenomenal book. What is it? Letters to My Future.
Past and Future Assassins, yeah.
Awesome.
So I want to read this one specifically because it's one of the hardest poems to read. As someone coming from Oakland, California, where the Black Panthers were founded, and the information that I grew up on, and then of course what you learn, and then to have someone considered, or should be considered, as the original LA Poet Laureate, have this piece that's so full of turns and music and divots and dips, and absolutely not at all what I know how to do organically, because sonnets scare me, and this American sonnet, it requires you to bring in the music of your being. And I love that about Wanda, being able to say all the music that makes us up can also make up this sonnet. And so she plays with the sonnet. She keeps the language super mouthy, super chewable. And the turns are like any other sonnet, except the music is really the maestro. So if you are someone who does not understand what that means, I implore you, cop this book and study. American Sonnet 16, After Huey P. Newton, by Wanda Coleman. The clairvoyant activist, ever ready to face the consequences of her perceptions, must subsist on stubborn hope, de Brutus, for maintenance, aids dodged determination to construct required change. Revolutionary homicide, suicide, means awareness of reality in combination with potential sociocentrism. Those ill-equipped to struggle against brutal powers risk extinction. To cooperate in the imprisoning of one's own people, psyche, is reactionary homicide, suicide, which will be rewarded by ever-watchful scions of the oppressive belief system. But to pretend to do so is to trick. Specific group resistance of rampant narco-necromania may be manifest in periodic eruptions of spontaneous civil violence. It is imperative that visionaries see war as ultimate service for resolution. Whoo! Listen, all right. So my favorite, the dismount, you don't even know it. You're like, she's talking tough to the system. I am just so in love with just the word map that she throws out here. She throws out all of the deuces, all of the doubles, and then comes with the very amazing one-line ending, the Simone Biles of dismounts. War as ultimate service for resolution. No period, because it's it's maddening. You know what I mean? It's maddening. So there are plenty of more here that I would like to read, but I don't know if I can show you what she did, because even in this American sonnet, it looks like a score. So she has the backslashes in there, and then she does something that feels so, I hate math, so it keeps me out, the brackets, but then like brackets, you have to do the bracket first, and then you go back and you understand the formula, and she knows how to do that. And I obviously, we don't have Sister Wanda Coleman here any longer to advise and be like, why were you doing that? Why were you, hurting my nervous system with these line breaks? But I say that to say she does that throughout the entirety of these sonnets. It's over 100 sonnets here. And there's always this moment where you don't know if it is a math formula, a scientific finding, or a jazz number. But all of it is really rounded up nicely. because she speaks in a language of knowing. Either you're living it, you've observed it, you feel familiar enough to the subject where you can learn it. And I think that that is one of the failures of most poetry, is that we forget that we are not just writing in a vacuum, and we are writing to people. Even if we're just writing for ourselves, we have to make sure that there's, access to this. And I want to close this moment with Wanda, with my favorite sonnet of all time from her, which is American Sonnet number 4. And it says a lot about how we live as writers, if I'm honest. So it goes: rejection can kill you. It can force you to park outside neon lit liquor stores and finger the still of your contemplation. It can even make you rob yourself. When does the veteran of one war fail to appreciate the vet of another? The ragged scarecrow lusts in the midst of a fallow field, and the lover who prances in circles envies me, my moves, has designs on my gizzard, kicks, shit. This is the city we've come to. All the lights are red. All the poets are dead, and there are no norths. See that dismount? Constant. Pop, 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 pop. Exactly, Major. Exactly. I did 2 poems at once. Sorry, friends, but they go together for me. She's constantly looking at war. She's using this form that says that we don't have a way in, and she's reimagined it with this music. And I'm so enamored.
Yeah.
I'm so enamored.
Yeah. And if you're going to be lawless, you definitely want to point your shooter at the sonnet.
Hey.
It's almost like a job requirement that you have to take on forms in order to kind of express where you are in terms, and maybe even to kind of reflect back who you are, just going back to what you were saying.
Yes.
Didi, do you mind if I go next?
Sure.
You can go.
No.
You can go.
No. It's fine. No. If you feel like it segues nicely, then.
Oh, no. Not necessarily. I'll let you go.
Okay.
Beauty before age.
No. I was interesting because I was thinking about, Denise, something you were saying with Tim's poem about writing. That poem was written right after his parents died, he said, right? And so I was thinking of lawlessness and the idea of lawlessness and trauma, and writing and trauma, and how maybe writing about trauma kind of enacts, or what's maybe a better word, like becomes a manifestation of the lawlessness on the page. And I say lawlessness, I was looking up the word, even lawlessness. I was like, is it lawlessness, or is it like something that's rebellious or disorderly, or like ungovernable? I was looking up all these different words of what that might be within the form. And then I fell on like being a transgression. I fell on that word, and what that means to write poetry that is about sometimes a transgression. So my work I'm interested in, not interested by just the nature of things, but by the circumstances of my life. I write about my late husband taking his life, and I wanted to talk about not my own work, but the work of Diana Coy Nguyen's, her book. So and it's just such a gorgeous, gorgeous book. And so when I think about the story behind this book, I thought, I hope I can just kind of hold this up. And I had a link, and I could put this link in the chat, maybe. I don't know if I'm not that savvy with things. Anyway, and then maybe that can get over to the viewers. So her brother, 2 years before he took his life, went through the house and cut images of himself out of the family photos. And this was 2 years before his death, and the photos hung there. And so I'm just amazed by what I think Diana decided to do was kind of fill in, or reclaim, or kind of restore that emptiness in those spaces. I mean, they were his image. He did own that. That was his image, his decision to take that. But it was such a kind of violence 2 years before the violence. So I thought, so I'm just going to do a show and tell of the pictures, because so there's like the photo itself, if for anyone's not seen this, like him cut out of those photos. And then she found herself, and she wrote this book, I want to say like in, oh, there on full screen, 30 days. So she'll fill in with words. And then she also thought about, it was interesting to think about the white space around that image of him. And then also I can I'll read an excerpt of this, because she also starts kind of thinking about how that emptiness then can play on, which I'm sorry, I'm backwards for myself, play on the page, that like the words from the whole, that how they could play then on the page. And she's got several moments where she does that, and then there's another one here where it kind of like looks like snake-like, but it's the exact same cutout image. There you go. So I'll read just briefly from the triptych, but I put a link in the chat that hopefully could get over to the viewers chat, of a video of her reading, and it kind of like the words. It's a really beautiful video. So what may exist between appearances and disappearance, between sound and silence, as something that is nearly nothing, slow music, quiet music, spare music, of sound and form. I fell asleep tonight after feeding us both. It was hard to think of you, cold. It was hard to think of you. It was hard to think of you. It was hard to think. And that's where the break comes. I'm just come back. She accents the break. While I slept, soundful, the wind howled and wet its whistling teeth. It has sound, but no form. What has a form, but no sound? There is no sound for everyone. Not everyone has a sound. There is no sound, for there is no sound, for there is everyone. There is anyone between the sound and the silence, the solitary figures ambling along, the oop, no sound, no sound. And it continues. It's just absolutely gorgeous. So I was thinking about I'm amazed by the book. It truly is really a tough book. But what it means to kind of like she was saying, reclaim the silence. Her family was silent about the event, was silent about the enacting of the violence 2 years prior. Like I said, the photos hung there. And so for her to bring this out into public, the realm of the public. And one of the things she also talked about was that through her doing this, she felt emotions and feelings that she didn't even get a chance to process because of the silence about mental health with her family. So, and for all of that, I mean, obviously this is a really, I think, what's the right word for that? A form that is super, not, the sonnets and villanelles, they are familiar, but then what we can do with those outside of this is obviously even goes beyond that. Super unconventional is the word I was looking for. But what it means to then take on that trauma, I was thinking how trauma can then plug into that type of form, or how the form then maybe determines itself based on that trauma. Does that make sense? So I was thinking of both those things. Yeah. And reading her work and bringing it today. Yeah.
Well, I think all of these examples, this is fascinating to me. I just had a light bulb, so much of when we think about form, we're thinking about breaking form. But sometimes the breaking happens before the writing of the poem. And kind of what you're saying is, in a sense, the poem becomes an embodiment of that breaking, and dare I say, with the case with Tim, maybe a play that brings us back to a certain wholeness. So it's not just what I'm going to talk about here, kind of renegade rebellion for rebellion's sake, or in the case of some of my students, just an intentional laziness, like I just don't do form, it's like too hard or whatever. But here's what I wrote. In the realm of contemporary poetry, in my humble opinion, lawless is not pejorative, but it invites an occasion to encounter work that radically departs from, and in the best case scenario, challenges our conventional notions of what is possible in a poem. The question looms in the face of such work: how might we readjust our sensibilities to accommodate other ways of seeing or experiencing language, which is to say, what to do with the humanity behind the art? How might we come to value, even celebrate difference and possibility here, especially when accosted with the new? Despite the imperative, make it, we rarely discuss how such works might alienate readers, or from the perspective of the artist, after so many years of dedicating oneself to a vision, leave a poet in a fog of doubt and frustration, if never accepted by the reading public. Elsewhere, I have said we do not teach ways of reading that make room for the adventurous, the iconoclastic, or daring works that befuddle more than underscore our comfort and affirm our middle-class values of conformity and provincialism, i.e., we like to keep it suburban. On the other hand, we know so much of lawlessness is also about resistance to hierarchical modalities that might suppress rather than amplify or liberate a creative spirit. Others have referred to such poems as marked by a wild freedom, one that I assert is confrontational, yet upon closer reflection, an invitation to explore our own freedoms. This is the very emotion I experience, and this is who I'm bringing in the room, when reading Lillian Yvonne Bertram's forthcoming and brilliant collection of poems, Negative Money, to be published by Soft Skull Press next year. Negative Money, a conceptual and deeply imaginative collection that hovers around Bildungsroman themes, are given interesting echoes in a series of typographic poems interspersed throughout the collection titled World Maps, which put one in the mind of early Italian and Russian futurism, Dadaist collage, and other publications and art that came out of early 20th century avant-garde art. What is new here is how the speaker, early confrontations of race and sexuality as a Black girl, which are problems outside them, are given a certain heft through the poem's typographic energies, especially interlaced in a collection that includes sonnets and other forms, such as acrostics, that are familiar in their layout on the page. Encountering these poems accentuate other poems in the collection, but at a pitch that is visual and textual, which is to say, there are layers here to unpack. I wish I had on the screen 2 or 3 of these so that you could see them, but I'll just say what Bertram does visually and linguistically is put to use early AOL-like instant messages, visual representations of a basketball court, text boxes, speech bubbles, punctuation, symbols, arrows, vectors, emphatic stars. And what I enjoy most about these poems is how they signify the inner reality of the speaker, an enmeshment in the reality of Black femininity, a complexity rarely captured in this way on the page. This too, so often, lawless poetry, unfortunately, appears as a kind of posturing, and the poems in question never transcend their attitudinizing. This is not the case with Bertram's world maps that do more than occupy lawlessness, but afford readers a prism by which to understand fracture in a country where white supremacy is prevalent. So in a way, I do think that poems that kind of challenge our conventional ways of reading poems are both kind of working inward, but also serve these kind of social and political functions of maybe investing in a sense of rebellion in a way, and not just for rebellion's sake, but for all of our sakes, to kind of push us towards a greater march as a tribe, as humanity. Do we have questions for each other before questions come in from the audience? We have about 13 minutes left.
Well, I wanted to kind of piggyback on what all of you were talking about. And one of the books I bought with me today was Diane Seuss's The Frank Sonnets. And it seems to me, Mahogany was talking about Wanda Coleman, then Wanda Coleman begets Terrence Hayes, begets Diane Seuss. And this book, in fact, Terrence Hayes even blurbs it and calls her poems Seussian sonnets. Her last name is Seuss. And so much of this book, when you're talking, Major, about like the suburban, what we expect, this is a memoir in sonnets, which is already like blows your mind. Anyway, but so much of it is about poverty, like just relentless poverty all the way through, unadorned. Like, and it's not like the arc is, I used to be poor and now I'm a successful whoever. No, it's like, it just stays within itself in a really beautiful way. And anyway, I just wanted to show you, this is one of, again, like this is a sonnet. Like they're, oops, I'm going to do that same thing Didi was like. They are giant. And this last, thanks. This last one is a sonnet, not rhyming, no rhyme, but so much internal rhyme and so much like a Lisp poem. And so, I mean, all the way through. There's sonnets that are so long that, you have to open, there's one, like you have to open the book this way. That's how long they are. B.A. Powell sort of gesture. And there's no questions. I guess maybe I'm just like saying, throwing it out there and seeing if anyone else wants.
Yeah, well,
I think we all influence one another, whether even now, like going back to, maybe antiquity to look for a poem and then sort of making it our modern take. But I think even just like living right now, we read each other and then suddenly like, oh, wait, I have something to say and a different spin on it.
Yeah, I was thinking about the zeitgeist as you were showing the page, and you too, Didi, and thinking about the sonnet. Thank you so much, Mahogany, for bringing in Wanda. You and I both know that 20, 30 years ago, such radical kind of representations, like treating the page as in the way a painter might treat a canvas, or maybe a kind of a minimalist composer might treat sound and silence. I think we're living in a great moment in which lawlessness is applauded rather than seen as the destruction of society as we know it.
I agree.
And we have questions. Do you think poets tend to stick to one or just a couple forms, or is there more play and exploration in a body of work?
I always like to look at, I'm obsessed with reading selected and collected poems these days. And so if you start with like James Wright, great American poet, right? The Hammock, Pine Island, that's him. And so, but he starts out with these little rhyming, A-B, just all the way through tight. And then the last section of his collected is all prose poems. So I think that most poets the poets I love tend to go through cycles, just the way a painter would, like go through cycles. I mean, you maintain your voice, but then like trying on these different forms can be so helpful in moving you to the next stage of your art.
I love that. I think Cave Canem taught me how to explore. It taught me the form so that I could break it. And so I'm not one of those poets. I used to be one of those poets who hated form. I was your student, Major, clearly. And it wasn't a laziness. It was a lack of articulation. It was not seeing myself in any of the work that was given to me. And therefore, I didn't see how my poem would be valid. And as someone coming from a space where that's constantly been the question, it doubles down. It doubles down as I don't know, maybe I want to fight and push back against it. But it was at Cave where it was encouraged that we learn it just so that we could break it. Not encouraged that we learn it so we could praise it, but so that we knew why we were not going to do this form, or why, how we use the form for the mechanics, but not for the sound. And just be really mindful, intentional about what the form could mean for me and two people who look like me and sound like me. Like, how can I make my sonnet sound like, something that came from Louisiana, not this old English, not even the Italian sonnet, which I was gifted as a homework assignment by Patricia Smith, and it killed me. I will never get over it. I feel like it was childbirth. It was the hardest poem I've ever written of all time, literally.
Yeah.
And I was so encouraged to just go through the nasty, go through the must, go through the mess, so you can figure it out. And it's okay to still not love it, which I loved. That was a part of the homework. You're probably not going to like this, and that's okay. And you still got to learn it so that you know why you don't like it. Right?
Yeah.
And once you can say that, it changes everything. So it became a tool for exploration. And my latest book that just came out, it is a book that is, the entire border of the book is a Black border with acronyms of prisons in California, because I didn't want to just say this book is about prisons in California. I wanted to show you that even the poem is detained when I'm speaking about right? So and then the poem goes, it's a full book poem that happens in the footnotes, that happens in the notes, that happens on the side, the margins. You think it's a haiku, and then it slaps you in the face and it becomes something that, like, I was so lawless. That there was nobody to tell me no. You know what I mean? And the only way they couldn't tell me no is because I knew why I was pushing back against the structure. So yes, it made me more explorative. Absolutely.
Yep. Right. Yeah. I was going to say, I think also the subject, in answering that question, the subject determines oftentimes the form in a lot of ways, I think. Or if you feel like there's a more formal form that a subject might fit into as a poet versus something that needs to be, blown wide open. So sometimes, and I see there's another question that's about vulnerability. How much is too much vulnerability? And I thought that kind of, for me, that plays right into what you were, you were saying, Mahogany, that the poem, for me, the form and the vulnerability and whatever it is that you might, I don't know if there is too much vulnerability. I think oftentimes, I don't know, I feel like oftentimes in poetry, there's not enough, like the poet's not being vulnerable enough. I know when I first started writing my poems about my topic, which is suicide, I had someone ask if they could buy some details, not in a grotesque, gory, horrible way, but just that I was writing all around the subject. I was way over here, So I don't know that there is too much vulnerability. And then form can also help either contain that vulnerability or open that up in a lot of ways too. So,
right.
Sorry, Major, go ahead.
No, I was going to say exactly what you just said. Sometimes form can open it up, and sometimes form can do a lot of masking and imprisoning of what needs to kind of be uttered and said. To that question, I was also thinking what's interesting about Tim's, I thought I heard you say, Denise, is that often many poets, at least of James Wright's generation and after, kind of went the route of being taught that a poem is something that was constructed, and it wasn't until later that, to use the critics' term, that breaking of style happened, which in some cases meant a loosening up and moving away from form. Some poets in their late career, and Patricia Smith is one of them, whereby they come to form as a way of not so much learning and celebration, but more or less because there's a restless imagination and a restlessness there. And this is just another area that they could possibly exercise their gifts and apply so much of their just brilliance in that area.
I came to form very late myself. I didn't want any part of it. I thought of it as like dead, just I wanted no part of it. And then I collaborated with a friend of mine, Maureen Seaton, who's like an amazing formal poet. And she had studied with Marilyn Hacker, and she could write a sonnet better. She just thought in sonnets. I don't even know how she did it, but she just did it. That's the way she come up, And I remember when we started doing collaborative work, she said, well, let's just do collaborative sonnets. Like, I write 2 lines, you write 2 lines. And I was like, oh no, I can't. I can't. But writing them with her, I love them.
Yeah.
And in my latest book, I have a 25-page Terza Rima poem called Terza Irma. It's all about Hurricane Irma, and my apartment was completely destroyed, and I had all these notes, and I thought they were going to be big old prose poems, and my notes were a mess. And I thought, you know what, Dante, like this hell, I'm going through a watery hell, I'm going to write one. And it was the best gift I gave myself. I love doing it. I mean, it's kind of like what you were saying, Mahogany. I don't love it like I love eating ice cream, but I love it like like powerful.
Burn. It's like core yoga for writers.
Yeah, it's like core yoga, exactly. And you got to, of course, you can't write it in once. It took me a year to write, and it was like, what rhymes with this? I'm gonna get it. And, it was like rebuilding the apartment, but in words. It really, it's very interesting.
Well, I think we've run out of time.
Oh, okay.
In the best possible way.
Yeah, that was fabulous.
Jenna was about to dong us.
I am about to dong you.
Uh-oh.
It tolls. It's the only poem that I could easily find. I was going to try and read you some T.S. Eliot, but after listening to you read and feeling so nourished and so edified, I thought, no, just go back to, John Donne and the Glen. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I know our audience appreciated it, learned so much, really soaked in everything you were saying, and the sheer performance of you all talking about poetry and bringing your favorites to life was really, really moving. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, great.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye well.
You too. Bye.